Up to Steve, he's got us rolling, so whenever you are ready, Chair O'Donnell.
Call the Urban Renewal Commission meeting of September 16th, 2020 to order. If you would call the roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle-Smith. Here. Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Sean Cross.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Here.
Commissioner Dan Holliday.
Here.
And Chair Frank O'Donnell.
Here. I understand we have the citizen comment. You would acknowledge that.
It is under agenda item number 1. So at this point, we don't have any citizen comments signed
Okay.
up for the regular citizen comment period.
Okay, well then we will enter into discussion item number 1, which is the Willamette Stone's personal service agreement extension request for 922 Main Street property. There's a staff report. We'll start with that, Mr. Conkle.
Thank you, Commissioner, Chair O'Donnell and Commissioners. So tonight I'll be having Mr. Graham give the presentation for this item.
Thank you. Members of the Commission, City Manager, ladies and gentlemen, tonight's agenda item is the extension of the PSA for Willamette Stone, an existing contract that was entered into in 2017. As you recall, the project was entertained by the developer as well as the commission for $110,000. And then there was an expectation that there would be a quiet zone developed to help with the proposed project, which would have been mixed use, including residential as well. And so when the quiet zone actually we were not able to get the quiet zone because of the cost. And so therefore the developers are here to give you an update now as to where it is, where the project is, and answer your questions. Today, we have 3 gentlemen, Skip Bertucci from Colliers International. And if you remember, he is our real estate representative, commercial real estate representative, representing both the Urban Renewal Commission as well as Willamette Stone. Also attending is Carrie Hughes with Willamette Stone, and of course Derek Metzen with Green Box Architects. So, if with the chair's indulgence, we will ask Mr. Bertucci to come forward to give a brief overview of the marketplace in terms of commercial leasing. And then following him would be Carrie Hughes and Derek Metzen.
Good evening, Commissioners. City Manager Tony. How is everybody?
Good. If you would simply give your name and city of residence before you proceed.
My name is Skip Bertucci with Colliers International. You have a plan from Willamette Stone that originally incorporated some ground floor retail with residential units above. And as we found out over the last few years, the quiet zone from the railroad was not going to be achievable or feasible. And they would dearly love to complete this project, but with the no quiet zone, the residential units are really not feasible any longer. Their plan is now requesting a change to ground floor retail with office above. And I'm here this evening to talk to you about what has happened with office markets in the Portland area, especially during the COVID-19 issues, and more recently, what's happening in downtown Portland with civil unrest. COVID-19 has created a pandemic event that is a black swan event. We've never experienced anything like this before. We really can't go back to look at any history of what happened to office space during an event like this. But what we're starting to see is almost a universal shift of preference from having a large headquarters office space in the central business district to maybe reducing your space by 40, 50% in the central business district, and then having a hub and spoke office type scenario where you've got a smaller central office in the city, and then have several smaller outlier offices in neighborhoods where employees can get there without having to use mass transit or drive as far or park. And a lot of this isn't really being driven by the tenants themselves, but by their financiers and insurance companies. And many of the insurance companies are now telling their clients that if you're going to employ this many people, you're going to have these safety measures in place in your office, and you're going to have to distance people and have new systems for treating airflow with UV lights and hand washing stations and fewer conference rooms and very limited elevator space and only a couple of people per elevator, which is going to make the large high-rise office a thing that is hard to manage in the future. They're also telling their clients that, gosh, you can probably control your office environment, but if your employees have to take mass transit to work, you can't control what they do on mass transit. You can't control the possibility for liability coming from their commute. So all are starting to look at this hub and spoke office strategy. Urban office has just started to absorb. We saw almost a cataclysmic event start in March where unemployment increased to 10 million people nationwide. It has started to return. About roughly 4.5 million of those 10 million unemployed are back to work. And it's starting to increase dramatically, though most of these people are not really going to the office to work. They're still working from home, working at the office part-time. And that's a trend that we don't see easing up anytime soon. Working from home is going to become maybe not the norm and not something that employees do every day, but they're going to work from home at least 1 or 2 days a week, or half days, or some sort of rotating schedule to accommodate fewer people in the office. Just in the last couple of months, we've seen leasing in the office space pick up. It is all in the suburbs. And in fact, there's been about a 40,000 square foot net loss of leased space in the Portland Central Business District. That's a trend that I don't think we'll see reverse in the next 5 years. The suburban office is going to become much more desirable than Class A Central Business District office space. Any questions?
Questions from the commission?
No.
Seeing none, is there another presenter? Yes. Please step forward.
Take the mask off?
Whatever works for
If you
you.
want.
First of all, thank you. Really appreciate you all taking the time tonight. I know our time is incredibly valuable as we've had a stressful year, and especially stressful time the last week and a half within our community. Tonight, I'd just like to address why we're asking for...
Your name, sir?
Sure, yeah. It's Kerry Hughes with Willamette Stone, not a resident of Oregon City, but live in Jennings Lodge nearby. Tonight, I just want to address the reason for the extension request and then why we've decided to request to transition the project from a residential use into a commercial use. With the extension, I know James and Skip had touched on it originally, is when we looked at this site, we were excited for the opportunity to do a residential project for Oregon City. I firmly believe, as being a nearby community member, this downtown area, Main Street area should have residential. A big part of being a developer is looking at what's the highest and best use of the site, and ultimately that's driven by what the end user needs and providing them an environment that's going to be a healthy and sustainable living environment. Having worked on projects next to railroads and dealt with railroads in the past, I know they can be slow to move and have a lot of asks. And so we were supportive and excited to see when the city took on the task to try and get a quiet zone because not only would it benefit this site, but anticipate it would benefit the entire site. It is something that, an investor or a bank is immediately going to ask when they see the site. It's, hey, there's a rail line. What kind of rail? It's a heavy rail. Okay, what are you doing to mitigate the noise? There's different ways you can tackle it as a community. The obvious way we've seen it done is through a quiet zone. We progressed the project, and we had our initial pre-application. We started to move forward on a residential project. Meanwhile, the city was working in tandem. I know you engaged a consultant to discuss, getting the quiet zone and what the improvements would be necessary to satisfy, all the stakeholders involved. It was late last summer, early fall, when we were advised that, hey, at this point, the costs have gotten too burdensome for the quiet zone to be pursued. At that point, we stepped back and looked at the site again and said, okay, bummer, what can we do maybe on the project level? Is there a way that we can attenuate noise? Can we dampen vibrations related to rail? We talked to a couple different contractors. We worked with Derek at Green Box Architecture to see, what would it cost to do that? Can we step back from the site? Just looked at a lot of different options. Ultimately, the cost was pretty burdensome to do those measures. Meanwhile, construction costs keep going up and up and up. I think they'll keep going up, unfortunately. So then we stepped back and said, well, what about a different use at the site? And that transitions the request to the commercial use. With the commercial use, it's what's great is we have existing commercial uses downtown. We can point to it. There's empirical data. We can say, hey, this property's renting at this rate. There's already a railroad. These have been here for decades. There's been an existing commercial infrastructure in Oregon City, so that will help satisfy the capital providers, the lenders, saying, hey, this has been demonstrated. Whereas residential, we'd have to be kind of throwing darts. There's no urban housing projects that are next to the railroad in downtown Oregon City. So we just, we're looking at what can we be confident that we can execute on, what's going to be the highest and best use for the site, again, for the end user and ultimately the community. And, we're excited about the commercial project. It will bring jobs. Right now, we're proposing roughly a 10,000 square foot building. Your traditional measure of, employee per square foot is 150 to 200 square feet. That could potentially bring 50 to 65 employees, either through relocation or, new jobs just created as people transfer. So, it's not housing, but it is something that could benefit, the Main Street and downtown area. And also Skip touched to, we are seeing, starting, I think everybody's trying to figure out what's the world look like now as we deal with the pandemic and as people shift away from the higher density living situations, working situations, and look at office spaces that are a little closer to home, little format. The great thing is with the commercial use and office use downtown is that you still have the amenities of a downtown. You've got the retail and restaurants. And so that's where we've landed and why we'd like to request the time extension that would allow us to be pragmatic and thoughtful in designing a building that's going to be a good fit for the community. We're proposing, again, a 2-story, most likely heavy timber office building. It could be commercial on the first floor or second floor or retail. We can figure out what's going to be the best there. And need the time to get the necessary land use approvals, as well as building permits, as well as capitalization. And admittedly, we also are dealing with the pandemic, which is having severe impacts to the capital markets for commercial real estate and just commercial real estate in general. And we've got to be cognizant of that. Again, thank you for the time, and happy to answer any questions.
I guess I'll make a first statement for the benefit of our viewing audience. The quiet zone has been addressed a number of times. I want everybody at home to know that was a $2 million expenditure for which we had no source of funding. So that's why that decision was what it was. Secondly, are you a principal for Willamette Stone, one of the owners? Mm-hmm. So have you been advised that one of the considerations was to require an additional $10,000 of earnest money?
Correct.
Okay, so you prepared to address that?
Yeah, that's part of the proposal, and the amendment we've been discussing with James is to provide additional $10,000 in addition to the existing $5,000.
So that was an acceptable provision to you folks?
The additional $10,000, correct.
Okay. Do we have any questions from our commission? Pardon me?
Yes, I do, please.
Yes, Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, hi, Carrie, nice to meet you. You mentioned that you're only talking about 2 stories now instead of the 3. So let me try to project into the future. I'm assuming you're looking at that from the standpoint that maybe at this point in time, it's not financially feasible to go 3 stories. But are you looking at maybe building it so that you could add another story in the future? Are you even looking at or contemplating, it's much easier to go from commercial to residential than residential to commercial in terms of construction. At least that's been my experience. Is that something you're maybe twinkle in your eye thinking about?
Sure. Yeah, the first question, as far as the 2 stories, Portland State Real Estate Development School and the professor Will Mock there always said, figure out your parking, and then you can figure out what you can build. So the square footage that we're proposing is really driven by the parking requirement as a big piece. And, would love to do something higher density and bigger. It's just, it's hard with the site constraints, right in, right out, just, costs and dynamics of the site and, neighboring properties, where the 2 stories is, you can have, you don't have to have an elevator, you have ground level access. And then also, it's really driven by the parking ratio requirement. As far as future conversion, I think, good point. Office is, it's a core and shell. And so you got columns and it's very malleable. And that's what we try and design to is just a core and shell that can, a future point could be converted if the market allowed for it.
I guess I'm being cautiously optimistic that I think that we will be able to get a quiet zone in the future. And while we haven't worked out all the details, it seems to me that there will be a benefit to more than just this property. There are a number of properties all along, and maybe there's a way we can work out a financial agreement that it benefits everybody and everybody pays maybe a little bit. The other thing I wanted to ask is that the staff recommendation has, you've already addressed Commissioner O'Donnell's concern about the earnest money. Obviously, you're already going to do market research. The last one is something that I've had discussions with Mr. Mattson about, and I would be recommending that we change the word insist, that you have any objection to us requiring the architectural style. I know that I was at the listening sessions we had way back when. I can't even remember. Derek maybe can remind me when we had those. So that's something that in terms of the sustainability of our historic downtown, that I really support us looking at more of an architectural design for the redesign of the building that meets the architectural style that we have downtown. I mean, there's not one, but there's many examples, obviously. And as our architectural consultant has been the chair of the Historic Review Board, I don't see him having any difficulty in doing that because he's already well-versed in all of that, and I have every confidence in his ability. So I just wanted to make sure you were okay with that.
Yeah, I think I recall you from the original design charrette, and we welcome that opportunity again.
Okay, Derek, so I've buttered you up now.
And I think Derek, he's kind of touch on a narrative.
Yes.
We're already, we're already thinking about that.
Thank you very
I'll
much.
acknowledge you in a moment, Commissioner. Before we get ahead of each other, ahead of this thing, if the city were to enter into this agreement for an amount of up to $15,000, you would have control of that property for a period of 2 years. You could choose to build, not build, and I hope staff understands what a 1031 like-kind exchange is. I hope, because I certainly do. So do you have plans to build any time in that? Do you have anything specific? I intend to start building in 3 months, 6 months, or we'll see how the market is and we'll keep it on the burner for up to 2 years. What's your plan?
I believe it, just sticking with the existing purchase and sale agreement, is that in that 2 years, we'll be required to get the land use approvals as well as building permits and provide evidence of capital sources. So within that 2 year window, just the way the existing purchase and sale agreement is worded, we'll have to pull permits and move forward on the project.
Well,
Chair O'Donnell, was your concern that a possible 1031 exchange might happen and that you're not supportive of that sort of thing? That's what I'm trying to.
What I'm saying, quite honestly, is we could potentially enter into for $15,000, which is apparently what they're willing to pay. we would give control of this property to someone who then has it on their books as an asset, not less than $110,000, disposable asset that they could trade, sell, or whatever. If you look up the 1031 IRS code, it gives you a lot of latitude of what you can do with it. And I just want everybody to understand what that refers to when you read that. That's something you need to consider tonight. We're not talking about someone that says, I'm going to come in here and start construction in 3 to 6 months. We're talking about a company that wants to exercise control of our property for up to 2 years. We're basically talking about an option on this property. So I just want everybody to understand that. And if you disagree with that, please feel free to speak. Anyone else from your group? Sir, if you want to step forward and take the mic?
I think,
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Smith, I didn't mean to.
It's comments.
It happens. It's easy to do.
No, I mean, I don't have questions. I have lots of comments.
Comments, okay.
so do you want him to do his,
No, I'd like to hear commissioners, if you think it's time.
So I have the same concerns as Commissioner O'Donnell has. I have a lot more than that. First of all, I'm probably one of the only people up here that was involved in the conversation that made the quiet zone a priority. For some reason, it's not a priority anymore with this commission. I am very disappointed in that. The whole purpose of the quiet zone was for us to fulfill our urban renewal plan, and our whole purpose in buying these properties, this property and other properties in the downtown, was solely for residential, was for the purpose of adding residential to the downtown. So these are what the properties are sitting there for. That's what we put them there for. That's what we have always intended them to be. When commissions change and urban renewal commissions change, priorities change, and that's kind of where we're at. So I'm really reluctant to go away from everything we spent the last decade putting into place for those properties. And so therefore, I don't necessarily really support the extension because I don't support the project at all. I do want to hear from, I don't know who has signed up for a citizen comment.
Mike Mitchell.
Okay, I would possibly like to get input from Doug Neely. I believe Doug Neely was probably on the commission at a time where these conversations were happening and can shed some light on, you know, what his view of these properties were for. But my take on it has always been that that's what we fully intended them to be, was a residential up above and retail below. So I have a huge hesitation going away from that. The other issue that I have is knowing that these properties are the main asset of the Urban Renewal Commission, and we are changing maybe our whole philosophy on urban renewal, it doesn't make any sense to enter into any agreement with regards to these properties until we know what our new focus is going to be. And we have a public process, and that public process calendar may or may not line up with this extension calendar. I don't think it necessarily does. So I don't see entering into any, you know, commitment or until that process has gone through its whole, you know, citizen process to find out, okay, if we already have kind of earmarked these individual properties that we own for certain projects before we even know what our vision is, then I think that's a huge mistake. So I think we need to really look at that. I do believe that the quiet zone is still of great interest to this city. Unfortunately, I think some of the people on the current city commission and current urban renewal commission don't know the history of why we got to that point and why it was such a priority, and haven't heard from business owners and developers about why that is such an important piece to the downtown, not just to the two properties that we own, but towards the entire future of the Willamette Falls project and everything else that we've been working for decades on. That has to be a priority again. And if that takes another election for us to get back and putting that priority into place in the next cycle of goals, then so be it. But we're not there yet. I'm definitely reluctant to kind of move forward on developing properties when I think we're actually in a place where we could still be on track to make those properties have residential components. What is needed right now is housing. What is not needed is office space, and what is not needed is retail. We had a full downtown, and now it's starting to empty out. People are working from home. And so, you know, building on a vacant property that we've held for decades for what is needed now instead of what is needed tomorrow is a bit really concern to me. So I do not support this.
Any other commission members care to comment before we take our third presenter?
Hold any
Not at this
additional ones
time.
till the end.
Okay, sir, if you want to step forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Derek Metzen, Greenbox Architecture, Oregon City. Rocky, I believe we agree with about 90% of what you said. The quiet zone is so crucial to development downtown on a long-term basis. And so on another day, I think that would be a good conversation to have, absolutely. And I will be coming back to speak to you at some point in the near future about housing. But again, that's a conversation for another day. Talking about this site specifically here on 10th and Main, there are a couple key factors that drive here. And Kerry was very right when he said parking drives the rest of the project. So looking at this site, we can accommodate between 14 and 16 parking spaces. And if we're going to have an ADA parking space, which we have to have, we can get 15, which is where we're at. And so that dictates what we can develop on here. So the previous development was denser, it was taller, it was a more substantial building because we were able to share the use between residential and commercial. That ground floor must be commercial based on what the parking requirements within Oregon City currently are. Existing buildings in downtown, they can change use and they don't have to add extra parking. New buildings coming into downtown must meet the parking requirements. So with the previous project, we proposed commercial on the ground floor, residential for several floors above that. During the day, the commercial got the parking. At the evening, residential got the parking. That's how we're able to get to 3 or 4 floors. It's just not that case when we move away from residential. My first architecture office was 20 feet from my desk to a railroad track. So I understand what it's like to have an office there. I also used to live a block away from a railroad track, and I know what that was like too. I preferred the office to the housing. And when it comes to HUD, Housing and Urban Development, they have requirements for standards, and part of that is noise. And this site without a quiet zone really can't meet those requirements. We can accommodate low frequency vibration or high frequency train noises, but doing both of those in the same project with that adjacency is very difficult because sound decreases logarithmically. So every time you double the distance from the railroad track, the sound decreases in half. And we can't really double the distance of that building at all to really make any difference. So we're fairly honed in there. Now, the finances are really more Kerry's position than mine, but I can speak to your concern, Mr. O'Donnell, that Willamette Stone is proposing to add in extra earnest money, which is money put towards the purchase price of the property. They will not control the property. It is simply preventing you from selling it to another entity or individual. They can't trade that on 1031. They can't put their name on the title. They don't own it. They're simply under contract to own it at some point in time, provided they go through a land use approval process, such as a pre-app, design review, full public process, all that and the rest, at which time they will have invested a serious amount of money, which is honestly probably more than the purchase price of the property, and will have shown their due diligence as well as their intent to actually develop before they would close on that property. So there's nothing sneaky that could happen there. The city still owns the property. I just want that to be very clear. So let's talk about the project a little bit.
Let me stop you for a moment.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
So you have the option to buy this property by virtue of this agreement.
Correct.
You don't own it, but you have the option. You could exercise, tell me if I'm wrong, you could exercise that option. Say I walked in and I said, I want to give you $250,000 for that property. You could exercise this option and pay the city, and then you could engage in a 1031 swap, could you not?
That is incorrect,
Okay, tell me why that is, because that's what the 1031 rules say.
because this contract doesn't allow for it. That is my understanding. Now, you will want to talk to Skip,
The contract does
who
not
is,
allow you to disposition this property.
you will want to talk to Skip, who is your broker before Willamette Stone engaged with him as well. You'll also want to talk to your staff and your legal team. I'm just an architect, I'm not an attorney. But I do see a number of development deals, and I will say that I do not believe that's a part of this agreement. So,
Well, I'm reading section 1.3, which says section 1031 like-kind exchange says each party of which you are one acknowledges that either party, as applicably exchanging party, may elect to engage in and effect a like-kind exchange. I don't see where it prohibits you from doing that.
okay. I would encourage you to talk to your legal team and how that may be of concern if that is of a concern to you. But I will talk about the project a little bit here. So we have a site that slopes approximately 8 feet from front to back. There's a plateau back here in this portion. We have Main Street that runs along the short frontage and 10th Street that runs along the long frontage, and obviously the railroad tracks back here in this area. We're proposing about a 5,000 square foot footprint here in the front, so it comes to the corner and reinforces that intersection at 10th and Main. We will tuck some of the services such as restrooms and stairs into the back of the property, and then the stairs, parking would be towards the back. Oh, here it is. It's right up in front of you. Good. So you can see the gross square footage for the development is just under 11,000 square feet. If we could move to the next slide, please, the second floor. So the second floor sits directly on top of the first. We have parking in the back, a lobby that faces 10th Street. So we entered off of Main Street on the first floor and then entering in off of 10th Street on the second floor, coming up to 5,000 square foot footprints. These could be connected for a single tenant to take the whole building. And I will say that the number of buildings in downtown Oregon City that could accommodate an 11,000 square foot tenant are far, there just aren't many, far and few between. The number of single office tenants is pretty substantial. It's a large portion of what's downtown Oregon City. And with the courthouse moving up on top of the hill, there's probably going to be a fair amount of vacant executive office space. And so we're trying to cater this building towards a mid-sized tenant. 10,000 square feet is not all that large, but for Oregon City, it certainly would be. Think of ZCS with something in the range of 30 to 50 employees, something like that. They're obviously very involved in Oregon City, and it would be great to have another employer like that down here, especially on a very visible frontage. So we are looking at a building that's faced likely with stucco that is not a recreation of a historic building, but gives homage to that, something of the cornice, a base that has reasonable sized windows. Think of what you'd see in the new buildings that fall along 21st or 23rd. They are in a historic district. They aren't replications, but they give homage. They're respectful. They're of the proper size and scale. And so this was a conceptual rendering of what we could do in that space. This is something you may think of Restoration Hardware over downtown, up on 23rd, something of that nature. So decent sized cornice, giving a strong base with color and texture, breaking up the facade, which is required by the design code, and we will stick with that. But then insetting the entry potentially with some planters or some greenery, and maybe doing some of that over on the side as well. And then trying to get something that, is a little bit taller up on the second floor that allows light to come in, so it'd be a very quality space. I believe that we sent over some precedent images of other developments that Willamette Stone has done. Exposed timber, light, airy. Now, while the exterior aesthetic of some of their other projects would not be relevant here, we would go for something that's a little bit more traditional. This sort of office space, I would challenge you to find that. I mean, that's kind of what we were hoping, perhaps, the Masonic Lodge would become, or perhaps the courthouse, when it's renovated, might look something like this someday. But so far, we haven't seen it, but we do have the opportunity to create it here on this site, and that's what we're excited about.
Very good. Anything further from the commission before I start entertaining public comment?
Chair O'Donnell?
And
Yeah, I see you got you have your hand raised, Mayor. If you want to proceed, go
Let him
ahead.
go ahead, it's fine.
I would just ask Mr. Metzen one question. In light of my personal health issues, what are the handicap access to the second floor?
We have a ramp getting up to the second floor. So it comes directly off of the ADA parking space, and it is the most direct access to the building.
All right, thank you, that's it.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yes, Chair O'Donnell, thank you. So it's a suggestion. In my mind's eye, can see the building that you're talking about that's on Northwest 23rd. I would think that our community would be more interested in having a building that's reflective of our downtown rather than Northwest 23rd. We're not Northwest 23rd. We don't want to be Northwest 23rd, but we want to be Oregon City. So I would like to suggest some elements that are reflective of things you see in Oregon City. I love Northwest 23rd, but I just as soon do my shopping in downtown Oregon City. So that's a suggestion. I do want to say, in deference to my fellow commissioner, that I don't feel that I'm abandoning the quiet zone. I think that we need to find a way to spread the cost of the quiet zone across more properties and more people who would be affected and benefit from it than just us. I think that we have an opportunity with our economic development manager to brainstorm some ideas that might help that. And I think that that is, in my opinion, for me, that's still a goal. I'm not abandoning that. We just don't have the capacity to do a $2 million hit right now with no visible means of support. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that I'm committed, while I'm here, to continuing that goal and pursuing it. Having been in the situation that Willamette Stone finds themselves in on one of my last projects when I was employed, I know exactly what you are facing. We started out with a project that we thought for sure we had a home run with residential. That was the goal of the plan. The economic realities of that particular time period completely wiped out all of our assumptions and our financial feasibility documents that we had. It just, there was no way, didn't matter how much money we threw at it as a commission, it wasn't going to happen. We just couldn't make it work. We were able to pivot to an alternative program for the particular project. There is now residential adjacent to that project, but it's basically a commercial, and the owners will be what I understand is converting one of the floors to residential now that things are looking a little better because people want to live where they work. So it's going to become a work-live situation with work on the ground floor and some loft units on the third floor, not the second floor. So I think that Willamette Stone is being nimble given the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And again, they have no control over it, we have no control over it. And I think we should at least consider their proposal. I don't think it is so off the mark that we can't take another look at other property we own, or help redevelop another property in downtown Oregon City that could be residential. So I just want to throw that out there.
And Ms. McGriff, you bring up a good point. Mr. Smith brought this up as well. It's the history of the project. I came to Oregon City about the time that these properties were purchased, and enjoyed reading the study that Metro paid for that you guys had done shortly after you purchased these properties. And if I recall correctly, the figures that were estimated at the time, lease rates, everything that went into those performas are about where we are. That was done in 2010, those studies were, and they projected about $24 a square foot, and they said, right now things are horrible, but we hope in about a decade it would be there. And looking at both of these sites with that projection, they said, do two-story office at this site, not residential, because it doesn't make sense. And the only thing that's changed between that time and this time was 2 years ago, Willamette Stone was willing to take a huge risk on this community, which I applaud them for. And the other thing that changed is the SDC fees in Oregon City have tripled. So making that residential development is that much more difficult. And a consultant that Oregon City paid for, with the assumptions of today, which ends up being right, said, don't do residential, do this project here.
I believe we've exchanged a lot of information tonight. I want to focus on the issue at hand, which is this offer before us. So is there anyone in attendance in this room that wants to speak? I'll allow anybody to come forward that wants to at this point. Former Mayor Neely, please come forward. Mayor, I do see your hand. I'll acknowledge you shortly.
Sir.
I being up here is Rocky's fault.
Sorry, but I do feel like...
Doug Neely, Oregon City. What's been so frustrating for me in terms of the urban renewal district is that we've owned two pieces of property down on Main Street for some time. And it seems like every time there's a start on it, it either gets pulled back for one reason. I know there was a mattress manufacturing company that was planning to use the 12th Street site. I don't know what happened to it, but I do know the economic director at this time was talking about it to the Chamber of Commerce at their meetings. And it's very frustrating to see us purchase these properties where nothing is happening. Now, I think I recall the mayor's question as to what I thought was the most important factor, and I said employment. I still believe that. I also believe still that mixed-use possibilities in downtown area are very, very feasible. It's located near our transit center. It's got access to parks, and I think I would not like to comment on the pros and. I'm not on the commission. I don't have to do that actually at this point, unless it's extended on. The pros and cons of changing that piece there, whether it should be residential or office space on top. But I think any of the other projects that come forward ought to take the mixed use into account. Mixed use is great for people that want to go to restaurants and everything else. I mean, it's got tremendous potential in my jobs employment piece, because that will attract certain people that are going to use the service of the downtown, and I think expand them. I am sorry that we haven't advanced on the quiet zone. It's a benefit not only to the urban renewal district as the residential above it. Not too many years ago, I lived very close to that area. I guess part of the quiet zone is really a visioning process of what you're going to do in the future here, and what kind of priority you're going to put on it. I just don't really have any real feeling for whether or not that change in use has better potential or not. I guess my concern would be that our view of mixed use, our vision, Mr. Graham has said, what's the vision? Well, the vision was to have a mixed use area down there. And I think that should be still one of the priorities. We did have visions. We weren't without vision when we formed the urban renewal district. But clearly, probably that vision is going to have to change in terms of what's happened to us over the last couple of years, actually.
If I may ask, Mayor Neely, do you have any thoughts about accepting or not accepting this contract or any element of it?
From what I hear about it, I don't have an objection.
Okay. All right.
But I'm not a decision maker at this point.
You will be. I've got two people waiting to speak. Mayor, do you want to provide your input, and then I'll get to Mr. Mike Mitchell quickly?
Actually, I was more, and I'm going to reserve comments for later, but I wanted to hear from Commissioner Lyle Smith and Commissioner Cross.
Well, I think you want to reserve your comments until we hear from Mr. Mitchell. Let's hear from Mr. Mitchell then, and then we'll put it out for our discussion. Mr.
You're
Mitchell?
the chair.
I am that. Can we get Mr. Mitchell on the line, please?
Working on it.
Okay, Mike, go ahead and begin by stating your first and last name and city of residency for the record, and then you have up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Urban Renewal Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Mike Mitchell, and I'm an Oregon City resident. I'll start by agreeing 100% with what Commissioner Rocky Smith said. I also find it very disappointing that the residential component of this project has gone away. I think that residences in a downtown area to extend the life of a downtown beyond retail and restaurant hours is essential. But I also realize the obstacles in the funding for the quiet zone. So, whether this proposal is a good idea or not, I'm going to kind of take a pass on that. I will tell you that as a board member of the Downtown Oregon City Association until very recently, I know DOCA feels very strongly that residential downtown is also important. What I really wanted to speak to you tonight about was the condition of that property over the intervening 2 years of this agreement. As you all know, that is a key intersection. It's the front door not only to our downtown design district, but also to Midtown and Hilltop. And right now, or at least the last time I drove by it, frankly, it's an eyesore. I would like to strongly encourage that should you decide as a commission to go ahead with this 2 years and give the applicant control of that property over the next 2 years, that you add a requirement that they clean up that site and add and maintain at least minimal landscaping of some sort on that site so that we don't have an eyesore essentially at our front door. And we have something that we can be proud of and reflects positively on our city for our residents and for visitors to our city. And to me, considering that they're asking for a 2-year extension and a pretty substantial change in their project, asking for some landscaping and maintaining that property to something we can be proud of seems like a pretty small ask to me. And I would strongly encourage you to add that requirement to the agreement. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Now, I'll open.
He stole my thunder.
You had your time.
That was going to be later, about the condition of the property.
Any further input from the commission members? Comments, questions? Mr. Cross.
So I just have 2 questions from staff. One, did this come from an RFP back 3 years ago?
Can you answer that?
3-4 years ago?
It did not.
Okay.
No, we had it posted we had multiple properties throughout the district posted for sale, and we were contacted.
Okay, so changing this doesn't really change like an RFP process. Okay. Second question would be, did anyone know what the estimated value of the property is? The real value, not what we paid for it 10 years ago, but what the actual value today is?
Mm-hmm. James, do you have that?
No, I don't have that.
Okay.
Come to the mic, sorry. Come to the mic.
Matt, you were just selling it for $100,000 still. I mean, get that. I'm just curious how much the Renewal Dishes is contributing for
Actually,
a project.
Actually, when the price of the property was offered by the commission, itself, and the developer accepted that price. The appraisal that we have is pretty old. So that's why I wanted the developers to come forth, as well as our realtor, to also discuss the market and give you an update on the property.
Okay. I was just,
No, we have no valid appraisal at this point. You said pretty old. I don't know how old that is, but nothing current.
Nothing current. If indulge the chair one more moment, if we could ask our realtor to come forward. He has some information regarding your question on 1031.
oh,
Skip Bertucci, Colliers. Commissioner O'Donnell, there is an exhibit to the purchase and sale agreement called Exhibit B. And it is in essence a format of what would essentially be a disposition development agreement that gives the city control over the property even after the sale of the property. That the developer would need to complete the construction of it within a given time frame. And if he doesn't do that, then the city has a right of reversion to acquire the property back from the developer. So he really can't transfer it without the city's approval.
And why don't we just remove that 1031 phrase from the first?
The 1031 phrase is really one that is more cooperation between buyer and seller, that if either party enters into a 1031 exchange, the other party agrees to cooperate with them to effect that 1031 exchange. It really doesn't allow them to transfer the property, A, without title, and B, without approval after they have title from the city.
Show me specifically on Exhibit B where it says that.
So
I've got it up in front of me, so.
In paragraph 4, seller's post-conveyance remedies, there would be a deed restriction on the property that allows the city a right of reversion to reacquire the property if the developer doesn't perform.
Quite honestly, I'd like an opinion from our own legal staff as if that's a correct interpretation.
Certainly.
I understand that you are a realtor, that you are working for all parties, which means you're working for yourself. And
correct. And this Exhibit B was drafted by City's Council.
already had one representation that was not totally correct. So I would have to defer to legal counsel on that.
Certainly understand, yeah. Just wanted to bring that point up, that there are protections in the contract.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor, I see your hand is up. Do you wish to speak, or are we?
I'm ready to make a motion that we approve the extension of the, whatever it is, for the 2 years with the addition of $10,000 earnest money agreement.
I'll hold that in abeyance for a moment. Did you wish to speak, Commissioner, or no?
Sure.
Okay, please do. And I know we have a motion on the table. Go ahead.
So,
Not yet.
Not yet.
I tend to agree with Commissioner Smith on this. I do believe pretty strongly that we need residential development in the downtown. There are moments if you go downtown without residential development that the downtown is just dead. And it needs people down there to feed it and to keep it going. Things that have happened recently, we have the Cove Apartments that had no problems filling up and adding residential development at that end of downtown. I do agree. I think we have to look toward the future, and the future and retail space is definitely concerning. If you're in the real estate, commercial retail market, there's a lot of people that are rethinking the use of office space. And this pandemic, if you read the news or read in articles, there's plenty of studies out there that will tell you that it has fundamentally shifted the way that we work, likely for a very long time. And I'm sure that is making the landlords and retail market very nervous because companies are realizing that they can be successful without having to pay for lots of brick and mortar. And so we are truly in a transition time. And I also agree with Commissioner Smith about our transition time of urban renewal. We are also in a transition time there. And then my other thought is I would love for, as part of the city commission discussions around the budget, to at least, it doesn't have to be, over the top, but maybe we have a discussion about the quiet zone and where that fits in when we're having budget and goal priorities that's coming up in the next few months. I think that would be a good time to re-raise this item and talk about options and the future of downtown and how the city can support that. I think urban renewal in general is probably not a good funding mechanism for the quiet zone just because there's no tax revenue. It doesn't meet the tax revenues that we need to earn from an urban renewal project. So that's a no-go. So if we're going to go down this route and we really want to support the future of downtown, then I think we have some tough conversations that we need to have. The other thing I'll say is we now have a new owner of the in the Confederated Tribes at the Grand Ron of the Blue Heron site. There's a lot of development, a lot of potential that's going to happen in that. So we have to think very visionary and keep focused on the future. And for me, that includes residential areas downtown. So for all of those reasons, I would prefer to hold on this. I know we're going to vote on it, and that's fine. I would like to revisit this next summer when we have answers on the future of urban renewal. We'll have future goal setting and budget discussions from the city commission, and that's just kind of where I sit.
Well, I find myself in agreement with both Commissioner Smith for his perspective on the status of urban renewal, and as restated by Commissioner Lyle Smith. And I find myself in agreement with everything you just stated, so I won't repeat it. Do we have any further comment from the commission?
Yes, Chair O'Donnell, I just have a question for my fellow commissioners. So when you say hold, what could you maybe expound on that, what you mean? Hold or?
From a contracting perspective, I would say we don't extend this contract for 2 years and we let things just sit until next summer, until we get some resolution. There's a lot of transition happening in the commercial markets with urban renewal. We just have a lot of transition going on, and I assume if they're still interested in this property as much as they have been invested in it so far, that they would probably be happy to come back 10 months from now or 9 months from now and re-enter into a new contract once, if that's the direction we decide to go.
And once again, I agree with that. There are so many things happening, including the Willamette Falls project and the effect that'll have on real estate values. I am not in any hurry to move forward on this particular item this evening.
I would love to talk to the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde about the quiet zone.
Did I ask
they're going to be a partner and a beneficiary of the quiet zone, and we have a new partner to the table. So it's a big project. It's going to cost a lot of money, and I don't think we should leave it, and I think it would benefit their project as much as it would benefit our downtown. So I don't say that just to be cruel and not support the contract. I really want development on that piece of property, and I loved Mike Mitchell's suggestion of the landscaping. So if the vote is to move forward, if it ends up, I would love for that to happen, to have a better facade on that piece of property.
Chair O'Donnell, just one more point.
Commissioner?
So I wasn't, I was partially facetious, but anyway, thank you, Mike, for bringing that up, because it was going to be my final point on this particular piece of property, but I was not going to put that on the developer. I was going to ask the city manager, since we still own it and under control, and I know we did do some cleanup of it at one time, but it's kind of fallen by the wayside. And I'm just wondering if we could look at possibly partnering with a couple of our art groups or even Mr. Dye about putting maybe some public art on it, temporary installation, so at least would provide some interest to downtown besides kind of getting the weeds cleaned up, and maybe that could be a community project where we get some volunteers and we all go in there, or we work in conjunction with Vance's crew to do something. Is that something we could look into? Because that I was going to bring that up. I wasn't going to put that on them and say, by the way, our property looks pretty crappy.
Well,
and it is the 100% corners. I like to talk about that all the time.
I'll make a comment as chair. The conversation continues to expand beyond what we're discussing here tonight.
I'm just asking, is something we could consider and bring back at a later, this next urban renewal meeting to get that cleaned up?
Answer.
If it's something that the commission would like us to bring back, we can investigate opportunities and bring it back to the Urban Renewal Commission. There are limitations on what urban renewal funds can be utilized for, so I think, we got to, it's probably a city expense to deal with an urban renewal property or whatnot, but if that's something we'd like to have a discussion about, we can bring it back once I have a chance to look into it.
Well, once again, we're dealing with the Urban Renewal Commission that's in a state of flux, and I don't want to discuss all those things. I want to discuss this element. I truly appreciate what Commissioner Lyle Smith has said. I mean, we have a major investor in Willamette Falls that very well might construct a hotel, at which point they would have a vested interest in a quiet zone. And the question always is, who shall pay and who benefits? And I think timing is everything. And for that reason, I will, when the vote comes and we can call for the motion, I'm going to defer a decision on this matter. That'll be my vote. So, Mr. Mayor, do you want to restate your motion?
Before I do, I have a couple things to say, but let me turn my mic on. Sorry to hold the space part.
You're audible. It's okay.
There we go. So I have a couple things to say. One is that, I understand that we've held on to these properties for a long time, but we've gone through this same process 3 or 4 times because of economic conditions. So there was a buyer, 10 or 12 years ago or 8 years ago, I don't remember. And then, we had other economic things happen and that wouldn't play out. If we cut these guys loose, then what's next? And I understand and I agree with Commissioner Smith about our ideas about having residential downtown. At the same time, the developer is telling us that they're building it as a shell so that it could be converted to residential when it made economic sense. No one could have predicted 6 months ago that we would be where we are today. I certainly couldn't have. In March, I did a State of the City and everybody thought everything was going great here. 2 months later, it's a disaster. So I just think that we have to really consider, do we cut somebody loose who is willing to make the investment, who's spent the money, who's, more than the $5,000 they put down in earnest money, they've spent a lot of money, making designs and doing all that sort of thing. Wouldn't it be better to have something there that could be converted to residential later on than to let this thing languish for another 5 or 10 or 15 years in the hopes that something else is going to happen? So for me, it's kind of a bird in the hand, two in the bush kind of thing. And, I just think that we keep killing what is good in effort to get what is perfect. And perfect is never going to happen. And if we continue to get into this path of having to have everything that we want, everything that is exactly the way we want it, we're never going to get anything built. So I'm going to withdraw my motion.
Okay, Chair acknowledges Commissioner Rocky Smith.
I just want to make a comment that, remember, we built the Cove with a developer saying, well, we can maybe transition those apartments to condos later. Do we think that's going to happen? Of course not. So no, I am not buying that.
Again, we're getting into
A piece of the cove that has been built was never intended, nor was anything ever said about transitioning to condos. It was the other side that is currently empty that was talked about.
Not true, no.
Okay, we don't need to
That's
get
not
into
true.
that banter tonight.
Can I make a motion?
I do want to ask, and you can answer from where, the construction you propose, is it constructed so as to be able to modify into residential? Because I want to make sure that there's no misleading statements made. And anyone can answer, just step forward and say, yes, we're constructing it to,
I asked that question.
I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
I want to hear it from the,
Sure. So it's going to be a core and shell office. The top floor, it will be, we'd have to look at the placement of everything. It's not going to be a very dense project with what we're proposing. Again, the constraint here is that's driving the office is a parking requirement. And just to touch on the, residential, again, we fully support, we wanted to do residential. As Derek touched on, housing and urban development, they have a decibel of 75 for noise, and that's an environmental concern per HUD, and we just can't move forward, do that noise. So that's why we've pivoted to commercial. We'd love to develop the site. I agree, residential is great downtown, just with the constraints at the site that we're dealing with as a developer. It's not, the end user, the residents, that's who we care about. It's not going to be a good environment unless that sound is mitigated somehow. So yes, it could be converted. Is it going to yield a lot of units compared to what we originally proposed? No. So just want to make sure, and again, we still want to have an opportunity to participate in this site and are excited about it. And but to answer your question directly, it's good. We'd have to look at column placement and HVAC. It's just with the efficiencies, it's not going to provide a lot
you'd
of
be incurring so many costs in terms of plumbing and HVAC and all.
Sure.
I mean, that would be an additional walls. I mean, I don't want to go down that discussion because it's theoretical in nature. When you go in there, your intent is to build office, period. So I don't want to confound the issue.
Oh, well, yeah. So. Thank you. So there are buildings that are suitable for converting to residential. Mm-hmm. There are others that aren't. Most of the buildings downtown are not suitable because of the way they're broken up. Some of the furniture stores downtown have approached us to evaluate putting rooftop decks in or breaking their buildings up for residential. And in every case, the answer is the structure is not suitable to do that because it was built 100 years ago, or because your floor plates are too close together. You can barely have the existing use in here because someone once upon a time came in and turned it from a 15-foot ceiling to a 7-foot ceiling. Like, it just doesn't make sense. This building is not constructed that way. The loads that are required for residential are actually less than what's required for commercial. And so the answer to that is yes. The cost of doing a tenant improvement in this building for the commercial tenant is going to be roughly $50 a square foot, round numbers here. The cost of converting it to residential at some point in time would probably be in the range of 100 to 120 because the core and shell is already there. Is it viable? Yes. Is that what we're proposing? No, it's not.
Thank you.
But again, I will say that there are other sites downtown that, because of their location, make more sense for residential. Bringing up the Cove, the closest apartments to the railroad, the noise there is no more than 25% quieter than it is here. So if here it is 1, there it is 0.25. And on the far side of that property, it's 0.125. It's roughly an eighth of the noise that we have at this site. I mean, it's vastly different, even though it is close to the railroad tracks. Or again, it's logarithmic. It's substantially different.
Do we have a motion from anyone?
Sure. The only motion that I would entertain at this point is only a time extension until July 30th of 2021 with no other modifications to the contract or any design diagram in order to have a mitigating, continue to still try to work with Willamette Stone and honor, the time and effort that they've put into it, but it would also allow us to get through our transition period and would just buy us more time before we actually move on it.
There's no way to
Second.
complete the land use process.
I'll second that.
Time out.
Input.
Are you proposing to extend the existing contract?
Yes.
So, okay, so not what we brought forward.
No, not the
Just
contract you brought
existing one with the
forward.
residential requirements. So
Yes.
essentially, we're gonna honor, we're gonna avoid the termination date in that contract by extending this to give us time to work through the urban renewal public engagement process.
Right.
So we're talking about the existing contract.
existing
with the
contract.
existing requirements for
Yes.
residential and everything else that's in there.
Yes.
Is there a
And I second that.
I did second
Okay.
it already.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. It's seconded. For the vote.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Rachel L. Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Sean Cross,
Yes.
Commissioner Dan Holliday,
Aye.
Chair Frank O'Donnell.
I want to clarify, is this provision with the beautifying the site also? Are we adding
No,
that
sir.
in?
No,
Just as is?
Yes.
it is.
Well, my vote doesn't matter at this point, so aye.
Motion passes.
I asked the city manager to bring that back to us, the beautification of the site.
Well, you've already entered into a contract that has no requirement.
That's a discussion for the city commission, not the urban renewal commission.
All right, that matter is done. Do we have anything else on the agenda this evening?
No, sir.
Then at that point, I guess
We're gonna
we,
give Katie 10 minutes to change the room, and we'll be back whenever that is.
7:40. Adjourned.
Thank